With 2023 over, it's finally time to reveal my top 10 sci-fi and fantasy books for the year. Now, most of the time when I do this, my rule is just one book per series, but this year I was really good at completing series or reading entire series within the year. So a lot of my favorite books are from the same series. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick with the top 10 from different series, but at the end, I'll also let you know where they ranked out of the 89 sci-fi and fantasy books I read in 2023, and if there's other books in the series that ranked above the book that I'm going to be placing at number 10 on my list for this video. So with that out of the way, let's get started with number 10 on my list. You have The Sunlit Man by Brandon Sanderson. This was the secret project that I predicted would be my favorite of the four, and it didn't let me down. This is the only one that, to me, truly felt like the type of epic fantasy we've come to expect and love from Sanderson. It had such a cool world where they were constantly being chased by the sun, and the protagonist had to overcome some fatal flaw within himself in order to be successful throughout the book. So basically, it's exactly what you would expect from a Sanderson epic fantasy, and reading it felt like coming home. As soon as I heard the word storms, I was like, this is what I've been waiting for. So overall, I gave it a rating of 82 out of 100, and this comes in at 16 out of the 89 sci-fi and fantasy books I read this year. The book coming in at number 9 was a complete surprise to me, and that's Will White's The Captain, the first book in his new Last Horizon series. Now, the reason this was a surprise is I'm not the biggest sci-fi fan in general. And then as far as Will White goes, I DNF'd Cradle after the third book. Didn't hate the series, just wasn't doing much for me. So I was never really planning on picking this book up. But I was having a conversation with my buddy Jordan, the Boiled Jellyfish, and we were comparing Will White with another self-published author, and I mentioned that as successful as the other author is, because they're both successful, I think Will's ultimately going to have the larger fan base just because he frequently gives his books away for free. And as soon as I mentioned that, Jordan's like, "You're right. In fact, The Captain is currently free on Audible." And I was in a slump at this point. I had just DNF'd 3 slower-paced, long books and decided I needed to shake things up. I needed something faster. So, since Will is one of Jordan's favorite authors, is currently free, there was low risk. So I'm like, all right, I'll pick it up. And I absolutely loved it. This was the fast-paced, fun adventure story I needed. It caught my interest from the first chapter, and there is always another option. The Light of All That Falls. This is book 3 of the Lacanius trilogy by James Islington. This is one of the more confusing series I've read, and it had a lot of elements that I don't like. Time travel, flashbacks, miscommunication, and then, as many people have complained about, characters that recover from trauma in record time. While I was reading this series, I could definitely feel that Islington still had some growing and learning to do as an author, but in spite of all of that, this was one entertaining series. I loved all of the action, the philosophical debates. I really enjoyed the complex character relationships, and I felt the ending was particularly satisfying. So considering all of that, I gave the book a 5-star rating, a score of 88 out of 100, and it finished 14th out of 89 overall. Coming in at number 7 is the 7th book of Fred the Vampire Account. This is Out of House and Home by Drew Hayes, who this has definitely been the year of Drew Hayes, so you will see him on this list again. But this 7th book in Fred the Vampire Account, many times in the series, Fred is kind of getting by with either just being clever or the help of his friends. He does a favor for someone more powerful than him because there's not a lot of accountants in the undead world, but they still have an economy. So there's a need for it, and he's helping people out. He's giving them great rates, and in return, they kind of save him several times. He is not a great fighter. He's not a great defender of his area, but with the help of his friends, he's able to get through obstacle after obstacle. However, in this book, he's no longer being underestimated. The person who's coming after him knows exactly who he is. They know who his friends are. They know where his weaknesses are, and they're attacking him where it hurts. And he can't just rely on someone else to get him out of this. He needs to actually figure out a solution on his own to defend not just himself, not just his own territory and his home, but his friends and his clan as well. So I really enjoyed this book with how Fred finally truly had to step up and be the clan leader that everyone needed him to be. Overall, I gave this 5 stars, a score of 89 out of 100, and it landed at 12 out of the 89 books I read. Book 5 in the series, Deadly Assessments, was right behind this and could have been on this top 10 list. It finished 13 out of the 89 books. At number 6 is another book that kind of came out of nowhere for me, and that's Ascendant by Michael R. Miller. This is the first book in the Songs of Chaos series. It really caught me off guard with how different this is from every other Dragon Rider series I've read. Typically, you have an evil empire, and there's a scarcity of dragons, and someone steals a dragon egg to train a young dragon rider from some unknown village, and he's gonna take on the empire and bring in a new, more fair world and more just world. That's not what happens here. Dragons are not scarce in this world. They are quite common. There are wild dragons, and there are dragons bonded with dragon riders. And there isn't an evil empire. There's just an evil that the whole world is fighting. Dragons, humans, everyone. They're all trying to get rid of the Scourge. It's the evil that's attacking the world. So with that, the dragon egg isn't stolen out of hatred or revenge or rebellion or anything like that. Instead, the dragons have a sense of superiority, and they do not want any weakness in their ranks. So if they sense that a dragon is disabled in any way, they destroy the egg. They don't even give the dragon a chance at life. Holt, who's a nobody in this town, he's a cook's son, he finds out about this, and he steals one of the eggs. He just can't bring himself to let this egg be destroyed. And that is how Holt bonds with Ash, a blind dragon. So I really enjoyed this story, specifically the relationship between Holt and Ash. Because often in Dragon Rider stories, you have to ask yourself, what are the dragons getting out of this? The Dragon Rider gets this powerful creature, this powerful friend. Usually they get the magic through the dragon. But what does the dragon get? Well, in here, this was a blind dragon who was quite literally dependent on Holt in order to survive. And then later on, Holt needs to learn how to trust Ash as well, and the bond they have is just such a special one. Dragon Rider bonds in general tend to be really special. Theirs, I think, is just a step up from all the other Dragon Riders I've read to this point. The trust Ash and Holt have in each other is second to none in all of fantasy. I absolutely love the story, and I gave it a score of 90 out of 100, and it finished as number 9 out of the 89 books that I read in 2023. At number 5, I mentioned you were going to see him again, and that's Siege Tactics by Drew Hayes. This is the 4th book in the Spells, Swords, and Stealth series, or the NPCs series. The first 2 books in the series were more cute and fun, and then the 3rd book gets more serious, and this 4th book picks up where the 3rd one left off. It is a much more serious story. They're not being underestimated anymore, and they're being asked to pay for the actions that they've taken in the first 3 books. Quite frankly, they've pissed off a devil, and he's coming back with a vengeance. This book doesn't have the fastest or most interesting start to it, but the ending is just diabolical in the best way possible. Overall, I gave it a score of 91 out of 100, and it came in 7th out of the 89 books. Book 3 in the series, Going Rogue, was right behind it at 8th out of the 89 books. From this point on, the top 4 books on the list really separate themselves from the rest of the list. Book 5 had a score of 91. Book 4 has a score of 96. To put that in perspective, Way of Kings, which for a long time was considered my second favorite book, has a score of 95. So all 4 of these books I ranked higher than I would rank Way of Kings. So let's get started with the biggest book I've ever read, and that's Superpowered's Year 4, Another Drew Hayes. This is going to be the top Drew Hayes and the last one you'll see on the list. Superpowered's is an extremely fun series. It's superheroes going to college to become superheroes. Reading this gave me the same type of vibes that I got from Harry Potter, of wishing I went to school with them and lived in that world and was friends with this group, because it just felt like such a fun time and I just wanted to be there with them. For the most part, the series is just a day in the life type of story, except every day in their life is a fascinating and interesting story. So it was just fun to constantly keep reading. There was really no lulls in it. Even with this being almost a 2,000-page story, it still was never boring. It was interesting the whole time. Now, the other thing about this series is there is a subplot throughout the whole series, but you only get small glimpses into it of knowing there's something going on in the background. There's someone controlling everything, pulling the strings, putting these kids where they want the kids to be, when they want them to be there, but you don't know who's doing it, how they're doing it, or why they're doing it until book 4. So you have the combination of the day in the life story plus the subplot comes to the forefront, making this just so interesting throughout. I really can't describe just how much of a good time this story was. Overall, like I said, it's a 96 out of 100. It finished 4th out of the 89 books, and the other books in the series could have been on this list as well. Book 2 was ranked 6th overall, Book 3 was ranked 5th overall, and Book 2.5 would have been ranked 11th overall. So all of these books were just absolutely fantastic. Any of them could have been on the top 10 list. And this is easily my favorite series of the year for 2023. At number 3 was the book that I predicted would be my top book of the year, and it really didn't disappoint. And that's Of War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill, the 3rd book in the Bound and the Broken series, which is one of my favorite series of all time. This is about 425,000 words of epic action and adventure. It has everything in it. Duels, battles, assassins, dragons fighting each other, philosophical debate, personal turmoil, trauma, loss, gain, love, happiness, jealousy, all of the emotions. It literally has everything. And the incredible thing is, he puts all of this into the story without it feeling too overwhelming. He did such a fantastic job in the earlier books building up this world to where he could have so much included in the story and you still be able to follow along. None of the POVs were like, wait, who is this person again? Or, we're going back to that point of view. Man, why did he include that person in the book? No, they were all interesting. They were all fun to be with and to learn what's going on in their story. And you never hated switching to the next POV. I mean, you hated leaving the POV you were at, but you were never upset going to the new one. So, one of my favorite books of all time. And overall, it comes in at number 3 out of 89 with a score of 96 out of 100. All right, time for my top 2. And coming in at number 2 was a book I expected to like. I didn't expect to like it this much. and that is Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. This is the third book in the Tawny Man trilogy. I read this and it left me on a book hangover for about 2 months. There is nothing I could pick up after this that could keep my attention. I was still just thinking about this world. I love the characters so much. They feel like the dearest family members I've ever had. And when they suffer, I suffer. When they rejoice or overcome something, I'm rejoicing right along with them. And this book is filled with so many ups and downs. It broke or shattered my heart time after time, but also filled me with so much joy over and over again. Rarely, if ever, has there been a book that I felt so emotionally invested as I did with Fool's Fate. It's kind of shocking that this isn't number one overall with how attached I was to everything, but I'll get to why when I get to the number one book. In the meantime, this was another 96 out of 100, number 2 out of 89, and the first book in the trilogy, Fool's Errand, was also a 5-star read at 10 over 89. And my book of the year goes to The Will of the Many by James Islington. This is the first book in his new Hierarchy series. Like I said, I could have put any of the previous 3 books in this spot, but the tiebreaker went to Will of the Many because it's the first book in the series. So for it to be the first book and to compete with those other books is just phenomenal. Later books, especially concluding books like Fool's Fate and Superpowered Year 4, they get the benefit of all the legwork that was done in the books leading up to it. They get to be the epic or exciting conclusion. But the first book has to introduce you to the plot, introduce you to the characters, build out the world, and The Will of the Many did that better than any first book I've ever read. It was exciting from start to finish. The magic system is absolutely fascinating to me. It's based on willpower, and you can cede your willpower to someone else. And that makes you a little bit more dull. Kind of like when you're at a job and you really have no desire to do that job, you're not the best at it. And if you cede your willpower, that's kind of how you go about life. You're not really invested in anything, and you're just kind of more going through the motions. But the person who gets your willpower is that much stronger. And the more people ceding willpower to them just keeps making them stronger and stronger until they're basically superhumans or super soldiers like Captain America. The difference is Captain America got his strength based on earning it and being a good person. That's not what's going on here. The people that get power ceded to them generally get there from connections and politics and who they know rather than whether or not they're worthy. So obviously you have that type of political system where the higher you are up in the government, the more power you're going to have ceded to you, and who you know is going to determine if you can get more power or not. That's going to leave a lot of political intrigue and backstabbing and just not a trustworthy system. Throw in a main character who's actually a lost prince of a foreign country who was long thought dead, and a group of rebels that don't want to cede their power and kind of want to topple this very top-heavy country, and you're kind of set up for a revolution within a superpower. So you got the political intrigue plus a revolution brewing. It's going to be an interesting story. In fact, I would say the plot to this story is second to none. And for those that have read the Lycanius trilogy, which I mentioned earlier, you know Islington is a good storyteller, except now he's kind of perfected his craft. So some of the nuances that you saw in the Lycanius trilogy, like for me, I kept getting annoyed at how often characters would let go of the breath they didn't know they were holding. You don't have those types of things in the story. He is truly at his best in The Will of the Many, and I cannot wait to see where this story goes. Overall, gave it a score of 97 out of 100, and it lands at the number 1 spot out of all 89 sci-fi and fantasy books I read. So let me know in the comments, what was your favorite book of 2023? And if you've read any of these, let me know what you thought of them. And until next time, bye.